Last episode was all about the princess and the events leading up to her own personal turning point, so this time we'll focus on Sylphie and her newfound identity as Fitz, the second part to the cut content for the prologue of Mushoku Tensei's second season. Let's get started. Episode 0, Part 2, Guardian Fitz, covering the extra chapter from Volume 4 of the light novel. A key difference that simply wasn't able to be adapted from the novels was the entire mystery surrounding the character of Fitz. You see, unlike how we can clearly see it's Sylphie in the anime, the novels never once made it explicitly clear that Fitz was her. Sure, there were plenty of hints that implied that it was likely her, but with Fitz constantly being referred to as he/him and the only tell being her skilled teacher in silent casting, you were never really certain Fitz was her until later on in the story. So, since that mystery is no longer there, I'll simply refer to Fitz as Sylphie now. Starting with when she was falling, I'm sure the number one question you have is why her hair turned white. Well, similar to how it is in Fate, it was the result of using up all her mana. By succumbing to the fear of the imminent death in front of her, Sylphie unleashed all her mana in a flurry of spells to try and break her fall. She remembered how Rudy mentioned how flying was impossible, but in the attempts where he did try to make it happen, he always put something soft on the ground to fall on. So, taking that lesson into consideration, Sylphie would try every element in hopes of wrapping herself up in something soft. Unfortunately for her though, the water wouldn't stick, the wind couldn't provide nearly as much resistance, her earth magic she didn't even know how to control, and the fire would just immediately dissipate. It was a nightmare Sylphie would constantly relive even after surviving by just barely slowing herself down enough. Contrary to what we were shown, however, Sylphie didn't really come out unscathed from it. You see, in addition to her hair turning white from the exhaustive use of mana beyond her limits, she had also broken both her legs in the landing. It wasn't quite the graceful tumble we saw in the anime. Now, where this chapter begins in the novels is right after Sylphie awakens from that exact nightmare. She was already the guardian mage of the princess, and her nightmare had just caused her to wet her bed right in front of Luke. Of course, she was extremely embarrassed, but with Luke knowing the circumstances of her arrival, he was much more considerate than how he normally would be if dealing with a man. In any case, that was much less important when compared to how extraordinary of a teacher she was. As a 10-year-old capable of at least intermediate magic in every school, she was quite the prodigy even amongst the other royal mages, especially since she was capable of that silent casting. So, with that catching the eye of the princess, she was taken in as her new guardian mage and equipped with several items that would allow her to do her job better. There were the magical boots of swiftness that let her run twice as fast, a flame-trapping cloak that kept her body temperature constant, gloves of overpowering which halved any impact on the hands, then the sunglasses which surprisingly weren't just to hide her identity. While many of the nobles did see them as disrespectful, they were actually magical items deemed necessary by the king himself. They were a useful tool capable of notifying Sylphie whenever Ariel was in trouble, one that became required after the incident in the garden. So, no matter how far away Sylphie was from Ariel, so long as she was wearing those glasses, Sylphie would always know if Ariel was in trouble. Now, one of the major clues that gave away Fitz's identity was the peculiar behavior Luke seemed to have while around him. You see, because he would always say how he loved women and hated men, it was rather odd to see him be so kind to a boy like Fitz. To us, we know that's more of a hint that Fitz was actually a girl, but to the nobles who suspected nothing, it was more likely that Luke had started taking an interest in men now. They began to think that perhaps he had finally come to understand the beauty of them. The reason why this is because homosexuality was just as common as being straight. In the Asuran capital, there existed far stranger sexual preferences than that between two men or two women. So, as the nobles talking came to that conclusion about Luke, they also pondered the origins of Fitz. None knew where it was that he came from, but there was one who did have some sort of inkling. It was quite a few years ago, but back when a certain Boreas princess was having her 10th birthday, there was a particular person who just so happened to stand out there. It wasn't Eris and her less than elegant behavior, but instead the teacher who transformed that monkey princess into a ladylike noble. Back when this noble had met Eris before, she was only ever known for neglecting her studies and beating up her classmates, thus the reason for her nickname as the Monkey Princess. But when this noble returned for her 10th birthday, Eris didn't behave like a monkey at all. Apparently she'd been trained by a mentor 2 years younger. Lord Sados didn't specify who that mentor was, but the way he spoke so highly of him made it seem like it could be the same person Ariel recruited as her new guardian. I mean, this Fitz person did possess much of the same skill after all. Not only was she well versed in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but she was supposedly more knowledgeable in magic than even the university professors and was said to regularly beat the knights in training in combat. There also weren't many other 10-year-olds who could just cast magic without saying anything. So, with that being the only knowledge these nobles had to go on, it was rather fair to make the assumption that Fitz might have been Rudy. Regardless of who Fitz was though, nothing changed the fact that he was still a lowborn. And when it came to a peasant being among nobility, there was no lack of criticism to be had from the nobles who looked down on him, much to the point that they just wanted to peel back Fitz's mask and see who was underneath. Now, switching over to Ariel's scheming, the noble she was scheming with was none other than Philemon Noto's Greyrat, the liege lord of Asuda's Millbots region. As for what they were planning together, well, since the main issue was Ariel's lack of influence, the best path to gain some was through the low-end mid-rank nobles. Since all the powerful high-rank ones were already loyal to the first and second prince, it was very unlikely that they would suddenly switch to a much weaker candidate. So, at least by going for nobles much lower down on the ladder, Philemon could tempt them with positions of higher power within the government. Then, by focusing on nobles more out in the countryside, she could reach a group of people less affiliated with the continent's political disputes. It was all part of a strategy that looked towards the future. Sure, she may not have power right now, but 10 years down the road when their plans come to fruition, those who supported Ariel would be the ones rewarded greatly. That was the promise that came when joining her faction. Another part of her strategy that was hinted at in the anime was Ariel's discreet gathering of the military's support. To other nobles, the military may have been forgotten due to their lack of importance recently, but if a civil war was to ever break out, whoever controlled the military would always be the one to win. They were a prime asset whose lack of political influence often made them overlooked. So, while Ariel publicly displayed herself as this terrified princess frightened by the disputes of the political ladder, in secret she was gathering allies and preparing to enter the fray herself. She was doing exactly what her former guardian Derek would have wanted from her. An important aspect of her story that I covered last episode, which you should definitely go watch if you want to understand Princess Ariel better. Now, after Sylphie inquired into the status of her lost friends and family, it was here that Ariel would give us an update on the Boreas family. With the incident having removed both their land and all their people with it, any power the Boreas had before was open for the taking by those who opposed them. It took all they had for any of the Boreas remaining to just try and keep their positions of power. So, with that being their primary concern, there was very little being put towards looking for the missing residents. At least that was until the Boreas were taken under the protection of Darius, a high-ranking minister who supported the first prince. With him providing the assets and funding to create a proper search party, this group would grow in size and lead to a story of its own, something the novels only briefly alluded to. Switching over to Grabble's scheming now, we were given a bit more context as to why Ariel taking the military would be so bad for him. Its position as the strongest military in any nation was definitely desirable, but it was more so the fact that half the army itself was common folk. As I mentioned last episode, Ariel's popularity with the commoners was outrivaled by no one. So even with Grabble having numerous allies in the upper chain of command, if a few captains and commanders were to suddenly become loyal to Ariel, any soldiers below them would surely do so too. Consider it a perk of being so popular with the common folk. So, with that being the main thing Grabble was worried about, he would discuss precautions with Darius just like how we saw here. The only things being cut, a few vulgar moments censored in even the uncensored version. In the next scene with Sylphie and Ariel, there wasn't really much different with regards to the whole assassination attempt, but the final attack did sever every limb on the assassin's body. It seems getting hit by a direct attack from Sylphie is powerful enough to blow all your arms and legs off. Another excluded detail highlighting Sylphie's prowess is the fact that the poison would have killed her if not for her quick thinking. You see, even as she was in the process of blacking out, Sylphie had still managed to cast detoxification magic on herself. If this was any other mage incapable of silent casting, then without a doubt they would have died right there instantly. Fortunately, her use of detoxification combined with the minute amount of poison she was struck by allowed her enough time to live until the doctors got there. So, after having defeated a famed assassin who was active for over a decade, Sylphie's impressions with the nobles improved greatly. She was finally worthy of the position she was given, and her ability to dispatch enemies without saying a word had donned her the nickname Silent Fitz. Many more assassins would attempt to come for Ariel after this, but each and every one would be eliminated by Sylphie. No matter how many she slayed though, more and more would just keep coming. And whenever the Knights Guild would be sent to investigate, they would always be pressured to leave the cases unsolved. Someone clearly didn't want anyone else looking into this. So, with each and every assassination attempt adding to the mental burden on Ariel, the only option to alleviate it was to flee, resulting in her departure for the Magic Academy at the end of the episode and bringing us to the end of this cut content. So that's the prologue for this season's Mushoku Tensei. Next we'll cover episode 1, but if you want to know the cut content a little bit earlier, then you can see it live on stream every Sunday. Just feel free to follow me on Twitch here. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!